Good afternoon, everyone, to our viewers and to our panelists for our webinar this afternoon on Bahrain and the impact of the COVID-19 outbreak in GIDHR prison. I would like to extend my gratitude to our organisers, Salam for Democracy and Human Rights, Amnesty International, Human Rights Sentinel, No Peace Without Justice, the Gulf Institute for Democracy and Human Rights, and the Bahrain Forum for Human Rights. We are hosting this webinar this morning after the recent death this week of Mr. Abbas al-Malala, who was an inmate, political prisoner in GIDHR prison. He had some pre-existing medical conditions, and his family had appealed relentlessly in recent months for attention for his medical care. This was denied, and subsequently he collapsed in his prison cell. Without medical assistance, he was left alone with his cellmate for 45 minutes before there was any attention paid. An ambulance arrived after an hour and a half, and he was pronounced dead later at hospital. We have appealed for attention for this issue for prisoners in GIDHR prison and the other prisons in Bahrain. And on the back of that, I know that Amnesty International has just released a report. We have some very esteemed colleagues here this afternoon who will join us. There is Mr. Devin, Kenney, who is a Gulf researcher at Amnesty International. Ms. Sara, Porru, who is researcher for Salam for Democracy and Human Rights. There will be some families of political prisoners, and they will make their statements. Yousif Almuhafdha will join us, who is the Vice Chairman of Salam for Democracy and Human Rights. Ghassan, Khamis, who is the Head of International Relations for the Gulf Institute for Democracy and Human Rights. Professor Damian McCormack, who was part of the Irish delegation who went in 2011 to investigate the situation in Bahrain, specifically because his colleagues from the Royal College of Surgeons had been arrested and were imprisoned. And Niccolo Figa-Talamanca, who is the Secretary General of No Peace Without Justice. For my own part, my name is Tara Rayner O'Grady. I'm with Human Rights Sentinel. And I would like to welcome you all again to the forum, and I will open up now, please, to Mr. Devin Kenney. Welcome, Devin.
Thank you, Tara. Just to confirm, y'all can hear me?
Indeed, we can.
Okay, perfect. So I'm going to give my remarks to presenting sort of an overview of the factual situation of what's been unfolding at GIDHR prison insofar as we understand it. And I'll start with just a word on sources. We know what we know. Amnesty International, at least over the past week and a half, has been able to speak to families of 6 different prisoners at GIDHR, in addition to consulting with all the human rights and activist Bahraini groups that we always do, like our partners here, Salam, today. Being able to speak to 6 families is actually pretty good in the Bahraini context, given the extremely high level of reticence of people on the ground to talk to anyone from the outside world, really. And getting information from the 6 families actually allows us to draw on a lot broader pool of knowledge. In Bahrain for years now, families of prisoners have set up WhatsApp groups that they're actually quite well organized. They're organized by building. So if you have, say, building number 21 at GIDHR prison, which has been the epicenter of the outbreak, there's a WhatsApp group specifically for that building that has, I believe it was told to me, 100+ different family members participating in it. So you're getting pooled knowledge in that way. And in addition, a second factor at play here, which has been helpful in allowing us to understand the scale and scope of what's happening, is there's a Bahraini Ministry of Health website where people can check their test results if they've been tested by COVID, as this is all handled centrally through the government. It turns out that this site actually works for prisoners as well. I think this was probably an oversight on the authorities' part, because that's really far more transparent than the Bahraini government normally is. But in this instance, as soon as families heard that COVID was confirmed present within the prison, of course, they naturally all started checking this website and turning up results. And most of them if they found a confirmed positive COVID test result, would post it on the group, the WhatsApp group that they share with other family members. So, we couldn't do an absolute spot check on every single case, but this is a pretty reliable method to get rough figures. So I do believe we have a pretty clear picture of the scale of this. So as to what the government has done or failed to do, I think there are two main axes we can talk about. Those are prevention and transparency. Prevention, of course, being beforehand, and transparency being more how they reacted once COVID actually was present in the prison. As far as prevention, Amnesty has heard consistently from families in Bahrain since September 2020, when we started making inquiries on this subject, that at JAO, there has never been a distribution of masks, face masks. There's never been a distribution of hand sanitizer. There's never been institution of regularized testing, which in a context like a prison, which of necessity you have, pretty large groups of people in close proximity indoors, is sort of the obvious preventive step to take. That was never instituted either. And actually, if you look at the statement that was put out by the Ministry of Interior on 28 March, there's implicit confirmation that none of these things were done. Most of the statement is given over to talking up, the purportedly excellent job the state has done in managing infection and infection risk at JAO. But essentially everything they say is post facto. It's about treatment of people once they were infected. The words masks, sanitizer, cleaning products, testing, none of those words appear, or perhaps testing does, but with reference to testing that's being done now, not preventive screening testing. As just a quick proviso, I should note, the authorities have done occasional spot testing of prisoners, so they may point to that, and I don't want to have someone leap out and say Amnesty got it wrong. I'm talking about generalized testing. This was never instituted. Occasionally, it seems that if the authorities had developed a concrete suspicion that an individual prisoner might have, contracted COVID, then they might do a spot test on them, but it was never done as a general measure, and masks and hand sanitizer have been absent throughout. On top of that, overcrowding at JAO made social distancing effectively impossible. JAO is severely overcrowded, according to all information we can get about it. As far as I'm aware, there's only ever been one official estimate that's been given of the capacity of JAO, and that appeared in a report from Bahrain's ombudsman, which is attached to the Ministry of Interior. They did a report in 2013, which was sort of towards the higher crest of the reformist wave, when it was possible to find a little bit more data and a little bit more openness in government institutions. The ombudsman reported that year, 2013, that JAO had a capacity of 1,201. That's how many prisoners it could hold, but that it was effectively holding 1,608 prisoners already at that time. So already back then in 2013, it was severely overcrowded. And unfortunately, we're lacking both pieces of data to make a good comparison today. Bahrain doesn't release official figures on how many people are being added to the prison population, so we lack that side of the equation, and we also lack the other side of the equation, capacity, because it is true that they have built some new buildings at JAO. So capacity will have increased, but at the same time, I don't think anyone would argue that the general rate of incarceration has been going down in Bahrain over the past decade. I think it's widely accepted that it's been going up. So it's fair to say that overcrowding has been a problem since 2013 and persists today. And this tallies with what we've heard from families. The estimate I'm given most commonly about what sort of an average prison cell looks like at JAO, there is variation, but the most common set of details that's been relayed to Amnesty is that your average cell is in the area of 3 by 4.5 meters, About a fifth of that space is taken up by a toilet area, so it's not effective floor space where the prisoners can be present. The cells are intended in the sense that they're designed to house 8 prisoners, but more commonly they have in the area of 12, sometimes a bit more or a bit less, but generally over the 8 that they're designed for. And I should say that in terms of both the cell capacity of 8 and the Ombudsman's estimate of how overcrowded Jiao was in 2013, I mean, those are their estimates. It's Bahrain's estimate of what they think is reasonable in terms of spacing of prisoners, which does not tally with international standards. The International Committee of the Red Cross/Red Crescent, they did consultations in 2009 among themselves, being probably the single international humanitarian agency most specialized in prisons. And then they did consultations with other groups working on prisons. And they came up with, I'm quoting, a recommended minimum floor space per detainee of 3.4 meters squared. So I won't bore you with the calculations, but I did the math, and the math works out to the size of a cell at Jiao, of an average cell, is appropriate according to this standard for about 3 people. 3. And they are intending these cells to house 8, so already double what it would really be humane to have in there, and then they're overcrowding beyond their own determined max capacity to up to a dozen or sometimes even higher. Another aspect to note in failure of prevention, detainees or prisoners at Jiao aren't given any standard allotment of hygienic materials whatsoever: towels, soap, rags, detergent, all those things. All those things the prisoners need to purchase at expense out of pocket or out of their family's pocket, since they are in prison and can't work, at the prison commissary, which is locally called the canteen. So in addition to failure to give free hygienic supplies, there's also a problem that the canteen, I mean, access is often cut off to the canteen. So if access is cut off to the canteen, that in effect is cutting off access to any hygienic material whatsoever. So to give an example, the brother-in-law of Syed Ahmed al-Wadai, who is known in the exile Bahrain scene in Britain, he's an advocacy director at the group Bahrain Institute for Rights and Democracy. He has a brother-in-law who's been imprisoned in Jiao on trumped-up charges, I should say. Syed Ahmed speaks to his brother-in-law, whose name is Syed Nizar, and Syed Nizar communicated to the family when he's been able to in phone calls that he wasn't able to access the canteen for roughly 1.5 months prior to the outbreak at COVID. So, roughly 45 days without access to hygienic supplies. And he's infected now. He's one of those who's confirmed infected, both by a test that's on the MOH, Ministry of Health website, and he's told his family as much. So the overall picture here is, as far as prevention goes, is no masks, no hand sanitizer, no standard issue hygiene supplies. Access is sometimes cut off to hygiene supplies altogether, no regularized testing, and very intense overcrowding. So it's, one doesn't have to be a medical specialist or a doctor to understand that this is a pretty combustible environment in terms of COVID being able to spread there. So it did reach there and it did spread. And so how has the reaction been in terms of transparency? I would say not excellent. The body in charge of prisons in Bahrain generally is the General Directorate of Reformation and Rehabilitation. That's under the Ministry. Their first statement acknowledging that there was a problem, that there were infections at Jiao on 23 March, and they said there were 3 confirmed infections. Since that time, Bahrain has gone completely silent about the numbers. I've looked a lot, I don't think I missed anything, and they have specifically declined to give numbers when queried. Reuters on 25 March asked the authorities for the numbers and got no answer. And in correspondence between the group Americans for Democracy and Human Rights in Bahrain and the Ombudsman, which I think it's fine to disclose this because both parties CC half of the planet on this correspondence, so I'm among those CC'd among many others. ADHRB pointed out there isn't any transparency in the numbers right now, and the Ombudsman's reply completely avoided the issue. It was just dead silent. They didn't even acknowledge that the issue had been raised. In terms of what families are going to expect in terms of transparency, obviously what they're going to want is to hear directly from their imprisoned family member. It is the case that Bahraini authorities have sometimes been having like a Ministry of Interior official call a family and say your son is infected or whatever, or is not infected. But people naturally want to hear directly from their imprisoned loved ones and verify their state of well-being and all of that, which, you know, to a considerable extent has not been happening. From the testimonies that I got, basically on average, the sort of the summation of it was that most families went a stretch of roughly a week, just a bit shy of a week, 5 or 6 days, where they didn't get any phone calls from their imprisoned loved ones, who, especially those in the building number 21 area, the epicenter where all the infections were happening. So it was roughly a week that they were left in the dark without being able to hear from their loved ones, while it was known that COVID was present in the prison and was spreading. Another aspect of non-transparency, it would be to ask the question, where are the infected prisoners being treated? Bahrain has repeatedly said in its public statements that it's giving intensive and excellent care to those treated, but is giving contradictory indications as to where that might be. Jau prison has a small clinic that would be totally inadequate for large-scale infections like this. Oh, sorry, I need to jump back. I mentioned the official number given initially was 3 cases and they went silent. By the list compiled by detainees based on these WhatsApp groups and test confirmations on the website, we're now up to conservative estimate at least 70, higher end estimate at least 50 cases. So substantial sized infection.
I have to, Devin, it seems that you're breaking up a little bit.
Can you hear me now?
Devin?
Yeah.
I can hear you now. Can you repeat those numbers, please?
Yeah, basically, from sources with families, we're up to a figure of 70 to 80 infected versus the 3 officially announced. Anyway, I'll wrap it up. I feel like I'm probably over time. The overview here is the absolute simplest and most obvious measures, which everyone has been hearing about since this pandemic started in February 2021, roughly, depending on your country. Masks, social distancing, keep your hands clean. None of those were instituted at Jau. And once the fairly predictable results did ensue, the level of transparency has been wanting at best. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Devin, for your work over the last 5 years with Amnesty International, with your focus on Bahrain. It's really very much appreciated, and you've painted a compelling but rather distressing picture. I do know that Syed Nazar, it has been announced today that he's being released from prison today, which is quite extraordinary, and we're very pleased to welcome that news. And it just really encourages us to continue to focus on the situation, and that civil society can have some impact here. I would like to introduce, if I may, if we can move forward, I believe that we're being joined by a gentleman who is family with some of the prisoners. We'll call him Abu Yousif. Abu Yousif, if you can hear me, if you'd like to join, please.
Yeah. Hello, can you hear me?
Salam, yes, we can hear you, Abu Yousif.
Hi. First of all, I'd like to thank you for giving me this opportunity to share the medical and human situation of my brother, Muhammad Abdel Hassan Habib, who is currently sleeping at the coronary care unit. His life is really at a danger, and he can lose actually his life at any time. And that's all because of the negligence of the prison clinic to take fast action. despite the fact of dangerous indicators he used to face during the past days. The news that I've received from the prisoners with Muhammad there in the same cell, they said that he was facing a lot of medical issues since 9 days. I mean, 9 days from the date of 4th of April, since I received the call on that day. And they said that for a period of these 9 days, Muhammad were suffering from severe fever, and actually the clinic were reluctant to admit him just for few times. His situation got worse and worse till he reached to the hallucination and loss of consciousness. And as I said, despite all these dangerous indicators, they refused even to receive him in the clinic, except for limited times. And due to the pressure put actually by the prisoners who were sharing the same room and the same cell with him, the clinic were just satisfied to admit Muhammad there for 2 times, as per my knowledge. And they were satisfied with giving him just a Voltaren injection and a suppository. And that's really strange for a young man who faced a lot of chronic disease. As per their report, he's a diabetic prisoner, and he's facing some issues in pressure. So as a simple medical measure, they have just to check first his sugar level and his pressure. And it seems that no one even put the effort to check the reading of his sugar and of his pressure. His situation, as I said, got worse and worse till he became unconscious. And after that, the prisoners decided to go for food strike, and they were reluctant to go back to their cell until Muhammad was urgently transferred to the hospital. And after that, they deposited him at the police office in the ward there in the cell, and they held them fully responsible for any harm that might face him. Actually, after this disturbance and not due to his dangerous situation, they transferred Muhammad to the hospital after 9 days of suffering. No one informed me. I mean, no formal calls from the prison to the family, to anyone of the family. I received a call from one of the prisoners telling me the whole story, and he told me that we don't know anything about Muhammad. All what we know is that he was unconscious at the time we deposited him to the police. Actually, on 31st of March, Muhammad called the family, and he said that I'm very tired. I have a fever and I have a lot of pain, and I think that something strange in my bed. We were trying to call the management of the prison several times without any success. On 3rd of April, he tried to call, and actually the family received a call for a few minutes, and the line got disconnected due to his situation. He couldn't even complete, the call and just raise his complaints about the situation that he's currently facing. We actually, after that, I made my calls, and I learned that Muhammad is admitted in the Salmania Hospital, the intensive care unit. and he's suffering from a very severe diabetic level. He's sorry, I might not be able to say the exact medical terminology, so apologize me for that. But he's facing a very severe diabetic episode and a severe decrease in his ketoacidosis. And he was facing heart disorders and hypertension, and he's facing as well heart inflammation with a very high level of fever. His life is really in danger, and he might lost his life at any time. I just met with his doctor a few hours from now and asked about his situation. I asked for a visit. The police there prevented me to first to see my brother and to get a little comfort about his situation. And after a long negotiation with the management there in Jau, they allowed me to see him for 10 minutes. And due to his situation, I couldn't even complete 5 minutes with him because his situation is really, really, really critical. Currently, he's facing a severe inflammation in his heart. And even the consultant, I met the consultant yesterday, and he told me that his life is his case is critical, and I cannot anticipate anything. Be ready for any bad news. Currently, as per the doctor, which I met a few hours ago, he said that we have requested the PDF to be ready for, or we send a request to PDF hospital specialized in heart condition, and to make an urgent surgery to him. And Muhammad is in the queue, so at any time he might need to make a very critical surgery in his heart. Actually, his life is in danger now, and I'm raising this voice to all human institutions and organizations to support the family and to support Muhammad. Muhammad cannot continue in being in jail, and actually we are demanding to get him released from the prison to get proper medical treatment and allow us to receive all his medical reports in order to share this report with consultants either here in Bahrain or even outside in Bahrain. I'm raising this voice because just to ask you to stop to help the company, to help the family, because his life is really in danger and no one can anticipate what's going to happen to him. And thank you very much again for giving me this opportunity to share my brother's case. And thank you very much.
Abu Yousif, thank you so much for speaking to us. I know that it comes at significant risk to yourself, your own safety, for being outspoken on behalf of your family. And inshallah, your brother will recover and receive better medical care now that we know he's in Salmania Medical Complex. I'm sure that there will be follow-up from the medical team that we have here. I would like, Abbas, if you could please show the video that we have. There's a video, it's about 1.5 minutes from one of the prisoners. Thank you.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. أما بعد، أفتتح خطابي هذا إلى كل عقل وإنسانية. هذا ليس فقط إلى منظمات دولية أو مؤسسات حقوقية، بل إلى كل عقل يميز الحسن من القبيح والخير من الشر والإنسانية من لا إنسانية. فهل تقتضي حكمة المسؤولين إن كانوا عقلاء في ظل جائحة كورونا التي فتكت بملايين البشر، حيث أقرحت الجفون وأدمعت العيون، أن تترك مئات الأنفس البريئة في سجون مغلقة تكتظ بالأرواح ووباء قاتل ينتشر بين تلك الأرواح، فالسجناء شبه أموات يهددهم ذلك الوباء، فمنهم مصاب ومنهم مخالط ومنهم من ينتظر أن يدخل في هذه الدائرة. وبصفة المعتقل محمد علي محسن بداو أطلب من الجهات المسؤولية إن كانت عاقلة من وزراء ونواب ومسؤولين بالإفراج عن كافة السجناء ومن دون قيد أو شرط. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Mohammed Ali Mohsen Badaw, who's a prisoner at the moment in Jau prison. You can see from that video that there are hundreds of people who have been taking to the streets each day over the last couple of weeks on behalf of hundreds of families who have members who are political prisoners. We have just had news that Mohammed Jawad Parwiz has been released from prison. Today, he is the oldest political prisoner and has been in prison for 10 years now. And we welcome that news. I would like to move forward now, if I may. We have another Bahraini representative from one of the prison families. Her name is Zainab. Zainab, if I can ask you to join us, please.
Hello.
Thank you, Zainab.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Hello. The voices.
We can hear you, Zainab. Please go ahead.
Yeah, okay. Hello, so my name is Zainab Ali Yousif. My brother Ahmed Ali Yousif has been in prison for 6 years now. First, I want to offer my sympathy to the family of Mohammed Abdel Hassan and what they are facing. What they are facing is the horror that all of the families of detainees are facing. We are always scared of getting a call from an inmate that tell us that our beloved one is in danger or his health has deteriorated. Now, if we are going to speak first, I would like to say that our people or our sons, our men are being held in prison for no reason. They have done nothing to deserve being in prison. For my brother, he's been in prison for 6 years now, and they were born a few months after he was imprisoned, and so far they never got the chance to see what a father really is. They don't know their father. They know the picture of him, the few faraway calls when he is not banned for a reason or another from calling. And he is still, we are waiting to see him coming back home. There is no reason at all. When they made their confessions, when they were arrested, their confessions were made or were taken under, duress. They were tortured into confessing something or stuff that they did not do. And still, when they went in front of the judge, they told him that we did not confess willingly. We were forced to. Still, the judge didn't do nothing to alleviate their, complaints. They were sentenced. My brother, was in prison for 4 times. The first time it was only for 2 days. The second time it was for 5 months. Third time it was for a week, and now the last time it's for 6 years. So every single time they stand in front of the judge and they say, we have been tortured into confession, and still to no avail. They are sentenced to, big sentences. For example, 10 years and then another one for 1 year. If we want to speak about their conditions now in prison, we are stating that they are innocent people, that they are forced to lose so many years of their lives behind bars. Their conditions now is so shameful. You see, people are overcrowded in cells. Some, a few days ago, I heard, one of the sisters of the prisoners, I think it's Mohammed Daqaq, she was speaking about the number of people who are crowded in her brother's cell. She said there were 17 people. An inmate got sick. And when, if someone gets sick, what prisoners had to do to get him some medical help? They start banging so badly on the doors, and they start shouting, and they start, trying to make so much noise, and still they are ignored. If it's a heart attack, or if it's something very severe, if it's something very urgent, probably the inmate is going to pass away before any kind of help is provided. They have to make so much noise, and they are ignored. Such as this, the case was with the Abbas Malala. They had to call for an hour, and the officer in charge there on duty said, well, I don't have, direct orders, so I'm not taking him anyway. We are fearing for the lives of people behind bar. As you said before, there is no any kind of hygiene. People are forced to buy from the canteen, and the prices there are unbelievable. Sometimes it's more than 10 times, more expensive than what you find it outside. Whether you are trying to buy a towel or shampoo or soap, of course, the choices are very limited to what you can take, and you can be prevented or banned from going to canteen for any reason. For example, if you do some of our costumes, religious costume like kaza or chanting or stuff like that, okay, or if you raise Shi'i adhan from your cell, you might actually end up in a solitary cell, banned from canteen, banned from you calling your families for a long, long time. Also, the amount of time that they are allowed to go to the fence, as it's called, the yard, is very, very limited. You see them, for example, they get half an hour a day, and then 23 hours and a half, stuck in their gloomy cells. Speak to me about, their immunity system. If they don't see the sun, their food is very dismal. The cases of food poisoning, are very recurrent. Problem is with most of our prisoners, many of them, they do not report, what is happening to them, because they are afraid that they say, for example, you cannot do anything for us. The government is not listening. So I'm not going to tell my mother that I am, for example, facing food poisoning every week, for example, because they are afraid for their mothers and their families' feelings. In many cases, they will say everything is okay, but then it turns out that it was not okay. It will slip. I remember when I visited my brother the last time before the quarantine and before the outbreak of the COVID. He was, he was speaking to me, and he was, scratching at his body. What's wrong with you? It's the rash. It's hitting everyone in prison. It's contagious, and they are giving us nothing to treat it. Some people are in worse case than I am. My brother is a little bit, dark skinned, so he's not suffering from the rash as badly as people with a very, fair skin. They are bleeding all over because they keep scratching and it's bleeding, and the medical help for them, the medical aid that they receive is completely dismal. They have no kind of medical help. Problem is with if you speak about the clinic of Joe, if you speak about any kind of system in Bahrain, they are all related to the government. They are all treating prisoners, political prisoners in particular, they are all treating them as the enemy. They are all treating them as the enemy. They are not treating them as human cases. They are not treating them as, people who need help or citizens in the country. They are, treated like, how can we say it, hostages. So there is a lot of cruelty, even from medical staff. My brother's third arrest, he was arrested when he was preparing to take part in a march. Suddenly, the police forces attacked the march. He tried to run away. He tripped, and they caught him, and they beaten him so badly that there was blood in the ground. Many people thought that he was dead for sure. He was taken to the police station where he bled on the ground, and then he was forced to take off his shirt and clean the ground on which he was bleeding. When they saw that he was, getting worse, he was taken to the BDF hospital. Problem is, as I told you before, that even doctors, in some cases, when they are treating inmates or political prisoners, they treat them as not, human cases. They are treated as the enemy. And that's what we feel. We feel that we are, being treated as not as, complete human beings. It's something we are facing, I think, the same treatment that, Black people in America are facing, or people of color in America are facing. All the laws that are written says that there is no discrimination, that everyone deserves, to be treated like a human rights and stuff, but it's all for show. They are becoming very, very good at hiding what they are doing to our sons in prisons. You will see, for example, the Bahrain Center for Human Rights, the one that's under the government's hand. They are working to whitewash the crimes that are being done against our sons and daughters in prison, and they are crimes. If you are speaking about preventing medical care from someone who really needs it, even, for example, if you get a fever, if you get anything, you don't get any kind of medical help. And if you get medical help, for example, you are taken to the hospital, the officer has the right to give it to you or not. In many cases, they choose to prevent a sick inmate from taking his medication in time, despite the fact that this is going to have very nasty results on these imprisoned people health. The pictures that we get of them when they get to prison for, say, how do we say, for, say, 6 years, you will be amazed about the shape on which they show up later on. It's like they've been in prison for 20 years. They will get in prison, looking so youthful, so young, so full of life. And then they will come in the prison. He is like, say, 30, and he will look like if he is 50 years old. Because of the suffering they go through, they will come out lifeless. In many cases, I've seen some inmates coming out with, severe, mental disability or, instability. They are unstable. They don't know how to deal with people. They are always scared. They do not speak normally. They don't know how to mix with people. They are, paranoid. They don't know how to get in a society. It takes them a long time to recover some semblance of their, social abilities. My brother, for example, who has been in prison for 6 years, he completed, his 6th year a few days ago. His daughters are entering school next year, and in the beginning, they did not understand that they did not have a father just like everyone else. And now they are facing this case. We do not really have a father. They call their grandfather, their mother's father, they called him dad. But now they do understand that he is their grandfather. He is not their dad. So what did our father do? They asked their mothers, did he do anything wrong? And she says, no, he did not. And they say, then why aren't they giving us our father back? And we cannot answer that question. We look at them every year, every birthday that we celebrate with them is a heartache. For me, I am his eldest sister. I cannot believe the pain in which my parents are living. My mother has diabetes. She has high blood pressure, and every time something or some bad news comes out from prison, her medical case is getting worse. We lost many beloved people who never got the chance to say goodbye to our boys because they are in prison. I want also to speak about the testing. When you spoke about it in the beginning about testing, that they are doing testing, they are not doing testing for everyone, only when you show symptoms. But people who are in contact with you, if they don't show symptoms, they are not tested. My cousin is in the same building, the building 21, and he is not given the chance to test. He was not tested. I asked his mother many times, and she says, despite the fact that he'd been in contact with many people who've been infected with COVID-19, he was not allowed, or he was not presented with a chance for testing. He was not tested. They only test people who look very sick or who have very, severe symptoms of COVID-19. So we don't know if anyone there or if many of them there are, infected with the sickness and their health might deteriorate at any moment. We are scared. We hear news and it's not good news. They will give you, for example, now they will start releasing people. They will release people who has a few months left to their sentence, and they say, well, we've made a change. No, you did not. What we demand is the immediate release of every single political prisoner in Bahrain. We are also afraid for the lives of those who are sentenced to death. At any time, the regime might decide that they want to prove a point, and then they might go on and, kill someone else, murder someone else. Don't tell me that it's execution or it's lawful. It is not. Those, every single confession is taken under torture. It should not be legally, taken at all. Every single confession was taken under torture, and we are afraid for the lives of people who are facing, horrifying conditions in prison, and for the people who might be killed by the regime just to prove a point and to tell us, well, that we can do that. And we know, yes, we know that they can do that. We are scared for our people in prison. For my brother, we were not allowed to speak with him for a long time. We spoke with him later on, and he looked thinner. He did not look very healthy, and we are scared for their health. So everyone who can hear us, please, if you can apply any kind of pressure on the Bahraini government, please make whatever efforts you can do to save their lives. Thank you very much.
Zainab, thank you so much for speaking to us, and we certainly will continue to apply pressure from outside in. I would like to introduce, if I may, Sara Porru, who is our researcher with Salam for our Italian team. She is a researcher and advocacy officer for the Italian team, and she is a lawyer. Sara, if I can ask for you to join, please.
Yes, thank you so much, Sara, and everyone to be here today, especially for this meaningful intervention that have been done so far, that I really believe already highlighted how serious the current situation is in Bahraini prisons. So what I'm going to do, and I will try to be short as much as I can, is sharing the data that the Bahrain Forum for Human Rights and Salam for Human Rights, for Democracy and Human Rights have collected in 3 update reports about the outbreak of COVID-19 in prisons of Bahrain. The last report was released today, so we have the latest data of what's going on. First of all, what is very clear from the data collected is that the situation is alarming, and you can see me? Yeah.
Yes, I can see you, Sara.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So I was saying that, first of all, the situation of prisoners of conscience in Bahrain is deteriorating day by day. This because, first of all, already, as it's already been mentioned before, the prisons were already overcrowded. So prevention measures for preventing COVID-19 are impossible to be implemented. But not only that, the first case of COVID-19 has been confirmed on 23rd of March in Jau Central Prison. And yesterday, the 8th of April, 78 cases of COVID-19 were documented. So the infections are running really fast. the spread of COVID is exposing the detainees and the employees of prisons to an imminent danger, also because some of the infected prisoners suffer from chronic illness, as we heard from the testimonies so far. And the worst part of the data that has been collected is that these chronic illnesses are not followed up as they should be. So the medical aid is not provided on time, and either the administration of prisons, either the government is not fulfilling their obligations to prevent all the problems that are following the spread of COVID-19. Another point that the reports are highlighting is that the deterioration of prison conditions had raised many complaints, which led to peaceful protests organized by Bahraini citizens all over the country. The protesters are demanding the prison administration to meet the minimum standards for the treatment of prisoners, which are not met at all. The latest data that are collected by Salam and the Bahrain Forum for Human Rights register 249 peaceful demonstrations took place since the 28th of March, which are demanding the immediate release of prisoners after the outbreak of COVID, because it's putting in danger in a really serious way all the prisoners of conscience in jail. So between the last days, 6th and 7th of April, unfortunately, 5 protesters were arrested due to their exercising the right to peaceful assembly, and due to the fact that they were demanding the release of the detainees. Luckily, yesterday, the 8th of April, these 5 people were released, but still the situation is really alarming. There are other 2 points that I think are worth to be mentioned and that are contained in the 3 reports. One point is that the Bahraini people are continuing their peaceful sit-ins also to condemn the martyrdom of Abbas Malallah. Unfortunately, his death was announced a few days ago, and he was a victim of torture, not only a victim of medical negligence. And what here is important, I think, is that an independent investigation is needed, because the official death cause was an heart attack, but we need an independent investigation on the facts of his death, especially because, as well as for other prisoners, the Malallah family stated that he needed medical care, special medical assistance, and it was not delivered, or it was delivered too late. And this is also a development that we heard before about the health condition of the prisoner of conscience, Mohammed Abdallah's son, Habib Yousif, but not only him. Indeed, the health conditions of prisoners who suffer from chronic illness and chronic disease are not only the 2 we heard about, but there are many prisoners in this condition, and they really are denied the right to health, not only the right to health, but the reports and Salam for Democracy and Human Rights and the Bahraini forums are showing that unfortunately, the spread of COVID really is representing a worrying trend, because the denial of medical care represents the most severe form of torture that Bahraini detainees are suffering since years, and now even more. So to conclude, what Salam and the Bahrain Forum are demanding is that the government will meet its obligation to guarantee and ensure the right to health, the right not to be tortured, and the right to well-being of its citizens, including prisoners, and to protect them from all diseases. Especially, it's important that prisoners of conscience will be released, and their families and human rights organizations will be allowed to enter and to visit in order to meet somehow and to put an end to this serious and disturbing lack of transparency in data about the corona cases, about the prisoners' health conditions, and also about informing their beloved on what's going on.
Sara, thank you very much indeed for your appeal for reason, really, from the Bahraini regime. I will quickly hand over, if I may. Sayyid Yousif Almuhafdha is the Vice President of Salam for Democracy and Human Rights. He's a board member of the Bahrain Center for Human Rights, and he worked as the head of documentation in Bahrain from 2007 to 2013. He has been arrested on many occasions himself and spent several months in prison on political charges. In the spring of 2014, Sayyid Yousif went into exile in Germany following continuous judicial harassment and threat to his life. He is currently living in Berlin with his family and continues to work as a human rights defender, promoting awareness throughout Europe about issues in Bahrain. Sayyid Yousif, over to you, please.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the introduction. And so I would like to be very short as possible. So, I will speak today about Abbas Malallah in particular, and especially that, as you mentioned, I used to work in Bahrain Center for Human Rights in the documentation team in Bahrain, and in 2011 I was in Bahrain, and I documented along with the other team, but as a head of documentation team, I documented his case personally, and I know his case. Abbas, as it was mentioned already, Abbas is married, 49 years old, and has 3 children, and he suffers from colon and stomach ulcers, and yes, he was shot by shotgun or like gun bullets from very close range, and in Bahrain in the martial law in March, and then he was we get allegation that he was tortured in the custody, and even after that he was taken to the court, and he couldn't walk in that time in 2011, and an eyewitness called Nabil Rajab about Abbas Malallah, that he saw him carried out by some other people, by the police and other people, because he cannot walk due to the torture that he was subjected to, and Nabil Rajab tweeted that in Arabic in 2011 about this incident. And yes, this is one case. So he is a victim of shotgun, and he's a victim of torture, and also from 2011 March until 2012 March, he was prevented 1 year from medical treatment. And you can imagine, I'm not a doctor, but you can imagine how much damage and side effect will be caused by this 1 year, exactly 1 year. And then his family, publish a small article by Hussein al-Wasti, the journalist Hussein Al-Wasti in 18th of March 2012. He wrote a small article that Abbas Malallah is demanding and is prevented from treatment, and his family is very concerned. And then after pressure, he was allowed to. And then again in 2015, he was prevented again from treatment. And also Hussein Radi, human rights activist Hussein Radi from Bahrain Center for Human Rights, also tweeted also in 2015, I'm not sure which month, but he tweeted that Abbas Malallah is on hunger strike because he was prevented from treatment, and then again and again in the last 10 years, Abbas Malallah died after. I would like just to say that Abbas Malallah died after spending, 10 years inside prison, despite his crucial accumulated health condition resulted from injuries sustained from brutal torture that he was subjected to. Abbas could have been entitled to alternative punishment, but he was completely neglected instead. He completed more than the half of the punishment, but unfortunately he was completely neglected instead. And this is just one case. Another quick case, I'm not sure how much time I have left, but another quick case about also Muhammad Sahwan. Also, he is another victim of bullets and neglected as well, and he died in custody, prevented from treatment, and many other people like Yousif al-Nashmi and Al Fardan and many other prisoners died in custody, and no accountability, no transparency, no committee, no investigation, and nothing happened after that. And this is one thing. The other thing, we have this overcrowded prison, and that already have been mentioned. But just quick, that the capacity of this prison is 2,000 almost, but there is more than 2,500. For sure, in job prison. And we documented even before COVID time many skin disease and many other disease due to this crowded, and they did nothing of that. And now with the COVID-19, it show you the serious condition in job prisons. And also, so this is the second point. The third point also I would like to mention about lack of transparency. When the Ministry of Interior announced that there are 3 cases, they announced when there were leaked voices, calls from the families confirming that there are, there are COVID-19 cases. So we didn't hear it from the government. We didn't hear it from Ministry of Interior. And this is one of the main things. So they didn't announce before. So we know from the family, this is one big problem. They should announce that if they say they are transparent and they are responsible. We should hear this in news from the government, not from families. But after 2-3 days, they were enforced somehow to announce. And this is one thing. This is when it comes to transparency, and also when it comes to the numbers, as my colleague and Salam mentioned, they only admit with 3 cases. But until now, we are talking about almost 78 documented cases in job prisons. And until now, they are silent. They just admit with the 3, and that's it. And after that, Tariq Al-Hassan, he went in a conference and tried to justify that it's Bahrain. It's not the only country that they are facing this COVID, and he tried to justify. And he just said that we understand the concern of the family, and then he started directly to threatening the families, and that from politicizing the protests, although they are political prisoners and they are the families of political prisoners. It is a political issue, so how come they cannot politicize this protest? No, it is a political problem. It is a political crisis since 2011, and so it is like a weird statement from him, and And the main thing, he didn't. He just started to threat and justify. But what happened? How did these COVID cases came to Joe from the nutrition company, from the police. So we don't know. And also what, you know, he didn't talk about the measures. What are the measures that Joe prison is going to take an action to prevent the spread of this virus, you know, like, and also he didn't announce any commission. Like, it's just normal, 60 political prisoner or 80, or they have infected, which it's not important. Like, this is what they're trying to say, because he didn't open any investigation. He didn't talk about any accountability, like just something happened and that's it. So, you know, so if we are in a state of law, there should be some investigation or accountability or transparency, but none of them. Only threatening, justifying, and mainly threatening the family from protesting, and that everybody will be held accountable. And instead of saying those responsible of leaking or spreading the virus on Joe should hold them accountable. And this is the second point. The third point also, I would like to talk about the culture of impunity. You know, this is also one of the main problems in Bahrain, and Joe prison is an example. I will not talk about the culture of impunity in general, but also in Joe prison, and as all of the colleagues mentioned, deprivation of treatment and the torture in Joe prison, solitary confinement, preventing prisoners from visits, preventing prisoners from calls. All that show you also that there is a culture of impunity. I mean, on one hand, there is supreme orders or like high orders from the officials and from the high rank official in Ministry of Interior. But I believe that also there is impunity, and also the officers are convinced and reassured that they will not held accountable for any violation committed against the political prisoner. And we have seen that. This is not just an accusation. We have seen that from the previous prime minister who met with the officer accused of torturing the doctors in Bahrain, Mbarak bin Houel, and he assured him that this law will not be implemented on him, and until today he's enjoying impunity, although he tortured my colleague Muhammad Sultan, who is a member of Salam for Democracy, and he's living now in exile. He tortured Dr. Ali Al-Ukri. He tortured many of the doctors. But so that's why I believe that it is also a culture of impunity. All the officers in Joe prison, they know they are enjoying impunity, and they know that preventing people from medical, that they will not held accountable. So we are talking about systematic policy of preventing prisoners of treatment since 10 years. So it's not only today. I'm documenting, or we are documenting, all the activists documenting, all the NGO are documenting systematic deprivation of treatment 10 years in Joe prisons, in all time, in all buildings. So it is systematic. And that's why sometime in Arabic we called it, سياسة الموت البطيء, kind of the policy of slow death, like we call it. Like, they want to make a harm or to harm political detainees as much, because you cannot, you cannot convince anyone. Why do you deny someone, for example, of having a disease, for example, and elderly, for example, elderly with chronic disease, like also, for example, Muhammad Jawad Parwez, Hassan Musheme, and Abbas Malal, many elderly with chronic disease, you prevented them from treatment 1 year, 2 year, months. It is a damage for them. I mean, if you prevent these people, even for 1 day, it is a big damage. And we have already with us a doctor who can speak more about this. It is a damage. It is a problem that if you prevent one elderly with chronic disease for 1 day or 1 month, and many of our prisoners in the jail, they are for more than a year, and Abbas Malallah, 10 years. So it's not an easy, and it's although it is a constitutionally guaranteed rights in Bahrain constitution, the right of treatment, and even in the international treaties that Bahrain signed. So why, for example, that we have to campaign as a human rights group, and we have to write about it in Twitter and social media and government institution like NIHR try to write about it or speak about why all of these stories. Why either it's government organization or independent civil society like us, or international organization. It is a guaranteed right. We shouldn't know about this story. If there is a particular prisoner need a treatment, he should get this treatment without nobody should know about it. Not we don't need to campaign for the right. It is a guaranteed right. And finally, and I just want to take a long time. Just finally, we call on the Bahraini government to. Of course, as you welcomed already the news of releasing or will be released soon, Mohammed Parwiz, but still we call on the Bahraini government to release the prisoners, in order to reduce the spread of the virus. And Ramadan also is an opportunity for the king to release the detainees, and this will be a positive step, will be welcomed as well by international organizations and international bodies like the United Nations, European Union, and if they have the will to do that. And we are encouraging them to release all of the political prisoners immediately to protect them. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Said Yousif. It seems that the overcrowding situation in the prisons it's like it's a petri dish, almost like shooting fish in a barrel at this stage with the amount of rise in cases. And I just can't imagine what it is like for the prisoners to just feel alive with this rash of scabies and lice, coupled with the terribly squalid conditions and coronavirus on top of that. I would like, I'm going to hand over to Professor Damian McCormack at this point as we're speaking about medical conditions. Professor Damian McCormack was a member, as I mentioned, of the Irish delegation to Bahrain in 2011, seeking release of the medical prisoners and the cessation of their torture. Damian has spent time in refugee camps in Calais, Lesbos and Palestine, working both as a field medic and activist. And he has spoken at the United Nations, seeking the establishment of a special rapporteur for medical neutrality breaches. Damian, I welcome you to the forum today.
Can you hear me now, Sara? Sara, can you hear me now?
Go ahead, Damian. Yeah. We can hear you now. Thank you.
Thank you for the invitation to participate. And I want to begin by sending condolences to the families in Bahrain who have lost loved ones to the prison system, and in particular to COVID in the prison system recently. I'd like to point out that such deaths represent a failure of the prison system, which is obliged to protect its prisoners. And it's a failure of medical oversight within the prison system, and a failure of government in Bahrain to fulfill its responsibilities to protect those prisoners under the laws of man and God, specifically human rights law, humanitarian law, and the rules of medical ethics and morality. The unnatural and premature death of a prisoner in a prison is a signature event. It's a sign of a failed system and of a failed state by definition. Now, we're all familiar with the recent history of Bahrain as a rogue state, as a pariah state, I would say, a state in denial, where torture is legal, where corruption is rife, where citizens struggle in a dystopian and dysfunctional tyranny. But this COVID virus, it's a new common enemy to us all. It has no respect for royalty. It has no respect for authority or authoritarian governments. And we should all fear this virus as an existential threat. Now, the Bahraini Al Khalifa regime have given the COVID virus a gift. They've given it an institutional incubator in the form of its prison system. And this virus can and will flourish in that system, and it will mutate in that system. And when it mutates, the mutations are becoming more virulent, more contagious, and more dangerous. And they will spread within such a system from prisoner to prisoner, to guard, to security official, to his family, to families, and eventually, potentially, to the royal family, to the king. It's only a matter of time, and any intelligent person, yet alone a king, should recognize the clear and present danger of such an institutional incubus as is jaw prison. So for the good of all in Bahrain and beyond, because we're all in this together, I would call on the authorities in Bahrain to immediately empty out their prison system, their failed and dysfunctional prison system, to release all prisoners of conscience and all political prisoners, and to show compassion and intelligence in their actions. But I appeal primarily to their intelligence because I know they lack compassion. Bahraini prisons are notoriously overcrowded, and the recent death of a prisoner is a signature of that failure. The medical oversight of the prison system has failed. No doubt medics are restricted by the authoritarian regime under which they labor, but this is another example of a breach of medical neutrality, and the medics involved are not without fault. There's no freedom of speech in Bahrain, no freedom to object, no freedom to express opposition to authority. There's fear and intimidation, corruption and systemic sycophancy, and this is where the virus will flourish. And this is where the old and the vulnerable will succumb to a new variant, potentially, an inevitable new virulent mutant of this virus. The elders within the Al Khalifa regime themselves are old and vulnerable, and if compassionate, they would act now to protect their people, their citizens and their prisoners. But if intelligent, they would act now to protect themselves. I absolutely support Salam's call for a public inquiry into the medical oversight of the prisons in Bahrain. And I call for the immediate release of all political prisoners and prisoners of conscience in Bahrain. I would point out that in Ireland, where our prison system is somewhat bigger than in Bahrain, there has been one case of COVID in August 2020. One case which caused national headlines. There have been clusters of outbreaks amongst staff, but the Irish Prison Service has managed to contain and eliminate COVID from the system. And it's actually very easy to do that in a prison because a prison represents the easiest environment in which to contain a disease. So the failure of the Bahraini regime to do so cannot be a mistake. It has to be complete and utter stupidity, which I doubt, or they've done it purposely and allowed COVID to run rampant amongst political prisoners in regime, which is truly a crime against humanity. I'm going to leave it at that. Thanks, Jared.
Thank you very much indeed, Damian, for your constant attention on this matter over the last 10 years and for that indictment of the lack of medical neutrality in Bahrain. I'm going to hand over, if I may, to Ghassan Khamis, who is a Bahraini living in exile in Australia, where he is the head of international relations for the Gulf Institute for Democracy and Human Rights. Welcome, Ghassan.
I reckon you can hear me, can you?
Yes, indeed, I can. Thank you, Ghassan. Salam.
Yeah, welcome. Salam, welcome all. And thanks for inviting me to attend this seminar. I would like to briefly to say there is a suffocating political crisis in Bahrain, which negatively affects prisoners of conscience. It is very difficult to solve human rights violation in Bahrain without a political solution. It is more appropriate for the government to approve international observers or United Nations reporters to visit the prisoners and meet up with the prisoners to solve the matters impartially. Let me start with the Bahraini government view. Always the Ministry of Interior declared by the Public Security Chief Major Mr. Tariq Al-Hassan that Bahrain's detention centers and jails are based on international standards and the prisoners receive medical care in regular basis. The legislative authorities in Bahrain, which is represented by the parliament, has not attempted to classify the prisoners as the prisoners of conventions. They are the same prisoners who demand for democracy and ask for fully elected parliament. All what we receive from the parliament that the MPs have visited the detention centers randomly, and they spoke to the prisoners, and the prisoners has no complaints, and all of them they received a very standard service, medical service, and the others. I don't want to go through the jail centers. I believe Mr. Yousif and your eyewitness already spoke about it, but I would like just to briefly say that even before the COVID-19 pandemic, we received around 750 complaints about the medical or medical treatment. 750, it's a big amount comparing to the amount of the prisoners. We have 3,000 to 4,000 prisoners of the 3,000 to 4,000. That means the quota of the prisoners are still suffering from the medical treatment. We have chronic disease. We got such as the cell anemia. We have bodies remains with facial bullets. We got cancers. We got disabilities. We got oldies. And as I said, it is hard to solve the problem or solve the human rights violation without a political situation, a political permanent solution. But to go to the way that we can solve it out is to accept the United Nations rapporteurs to attend and enter the Bahraini detention centers and solve the matters impartially. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ghassan, for that intervention. I appreciate it. Our final speaker today is Niccolo Figa-Talamanca, who is the Secretary General of No Peace Without Justice, the international human rights advocacy group. No Peace has been working to support Bahraini partners to advance human rights and democracy since the early 2000s, including issues of accountability for human rights violations. Niccolo himself holds a PhD in international law from the University of Palermo and a Master's of International Law from the University of Nottingham. Niccolo, I would like to welcome you to the floor.
Thank you very much. First of all, I want to say thank you, truly thank you to Tara for having chaired, and to Salam for having convened this meeting. This is the situation of prisons, which in many countries and Damian has mentioned, has been kept under control, and but not in all countries, and certainly not in Bahrain. I think the main message that I see emerging from the testimony that we heard here today, directly from the witnesses and the family members that were taking part from Bahrain, as well as from experts, is that the situation in Bahrain is not a matter of concern because the authorities have been willing but unable to contain the virus. This is not the case. I think it is evident that there is more than mere incompetence. There is more than mere negligence, but a decision has been made that those who are in prison, particularly those who are in prison for peacefully opposing the regime, have to be not cared for, have to suffer. The reason they are in prison is not because they committed any crimes, but because they need to be punished. And the authorities obviously have taken the opportunity, even with the risk that this brings to the country and to themselves, the opportunity of COVID to do the job that they would like to do themselves, which and they have indeed done over the years, which is to make the opponents of the regime, particularly the peaceful opponents, suffer as a warning to others, as a punishment and vengeance on those who dared oppose them, and also as a demonstration of Yousif said it very well, said Yousif, of not just the culture of impunity, but the policy of impunity. Impunity is not simply the lack of punishment in this case. It is the demonstration of their power. Power is power because it is arbitrary. Power is power because it has no consequences. Power is power because it is free of any sense of obligation towards society, towards the common good. Power is not power if you're accountable to them. Power to them is being free from accountability. So it goes beyond a mere culture or situation of impunity. Impunity becomes the value. Impunity becomes what they strive to demonstrate power with. And what better occasion than for the opponents of the regime to waste away in a way that can be blamed to a global pandemic, in a way that cannot be blamed directly on them, and yet is a direct consequence of the policy of actively denying medical treatment, actively denying access to the basics, to what Devin said it very clearly, what we do, what all of us do. Wash your hands. You can't wash your hands if you don't have access to soap. Wear a mask. You can't wear a mask when you don't have access to masks. And the denial of those basics is a decision. It doesn't happen by accident. It is a decision because we see it over and over in different buildings in Joe Prison, and we see it in the way that the government reacts. Now, I think our own obligation and the obligation of other countries is that of calling this out. And I think it's very important. This is why this seminar is important. And this is why the Amnesty report is very important. And this is why even what sounds like or what could be condemned as empty words, such as the European Parliament resolution adopted a couple of weeks ago on Bahrain, urgent resolutions at the plenary of the last session of the European Parliament, is important because it calls them out. It says this is not acceptable. And it is the normalization of their abuse, which is even a greater danger, let's say, to the system, a spread of the disease of normalization of abuse, which we should and we have to resist for the sake of the Bahrainis who are in prison, but also, Damian said it very well, for our own sake. You have to be intelligent as well, and not just compassionate. This so my conclusion, since I'm offered the last slot, is is to say thank you, and thank you to those who spoke. Thank you to those who collected and presented so effectively the data. We heard from Sara the situation up to today. We heard from Sir Yousif how this is part of what the government intends. We heard directly from the witnesses on this extraordinary voice connection that we had directly from the families of the witness. One of them had to leave us because he had to go to the hospital. And this sort of event is essential so that we cannot say we didn't know. And this is also the obligation on governments around the world, for whom Bahrain is an important partner, for their own self-interest, if not for compassion. They cannot simply stand by and let those atrocities continue. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Niccolo. Very much appreciated for summarising our event today. I do know that families of political prisoners have been called in recent days. They've been summoned to police stations and made to sign declarations that they would not join the demonstrations, appealing for both medical assistance for their loved ones and for release of the political prisoners. Indeed, we know that Ramadan begins next week, and at this time of the year, generally, there is some gesture from the government of jubilee or amnesty and the release of some prisoners. We do not expect that there are generally many political prisoners released. This year, indeed, we have news that there have been over 70 prisoners released in recent days, but they are all non-political prisoners. They aren't prisoners of conscience. And these people that we are appealing for are not criminals. They are political prisoners and have been over the last 10 years in and out through the judiciary system, which has engaged in kangaroo courts. This reminds me really, as we have come to the end of Easter ourselves in the West, those of us who are of the Christian ethos, of the amnesty that was made during the time of Christ, when Barabbas, who was a criminal, was freed instead of Jesus Christ. And we would appeal for reason from the Bahraini regime, for access for the special rapporteurs to perform investigations, and really for the release of the prisoners of conscience in Bahrain, a broad jubilee for those prisoners, the political prisoners in Bahrain. Again, finally, thank you all for joining today, for your time, for your determination and your efforts for the people of Bahrain, and for your renewed commitment to continue the appeals for the end to the human rights crisis in Bahrain. Thank you.